August 25th, 1944. Cherbourg, Harbour, Normandy, France. The air rire of fuel, salt, and urgency. Sergeant William Henderson wiped the grease from his hands, staring in disbelief at the endless line of trucks stretching toward the horizon. Only months earlier, the British had dismissed these machines as failures, underpowered, poorly designed, unsuited for modern warfare. Yet now, thousands of them stood ready to attempt the impossible, to supply General Patton's Third Army as it thundered across 400 MOF, devastated French countryside. The letters GMC stamped on each hood stood for General Motors Corporation. But to these, mostly African-American drivers, climbing into those trucks, exhausted before their engines even started, they meant something more profound. Survival, endurance, and the lifeline between victory and defeat. What none of them knew that morning was that this humble truck, the 212-ton GMC CQTW, known affectionately as the Jimmy Ordus and a half, would soon prove more valuable than any tank or airplane. It would become the backbone of the most critical supply operation in modern military history. The story began not in battle, but in 1939 in the quiet design rooms of General Motors. The U.S. Army Ordnance Corps had requested a new 212-ton six-wheel drive truck that could haul loads over any terrain. Engineers at GMC's Pontiac, Michigan facility began with a commercial design and strengthened it, adding a second rear axle, all-wheel drive, and reinforced steel rails. The first prototype, the ACKWX 353, ran on a modest 77 horsepower inline 6 engine. France placed an early order for 1,000 of these experimental vehicles, but the German Blitzkrieg arrived first. Within weeks, France had fallen. The trucks meant for French soldiers were seized by the Germans and ironically used on the Eastern Front, where even German troops admitted their reliability. The British tested their share of the trucks in 1940 and found them lacking, too slow, too heavy, too clumsy for Europe's narrow roads. They declared the design unsuitable for war and sent most of the trucks east under the Lend-Lease program to the Soviet Union. To British analysts, the American idea of mass-producing adequate trucks seemed crude, but American engineers knew something the British did not. In a global war, perfection mattered less than numbers. The goal was not to build the best truck. It was to build enough trucks towing. By 1941, GMC introduced their designed model, the CCKTUW. The name itself was a code C for 1941 design, C for conventional cab, K for all-wheel drive, and W for dual rear axles. With a new 270 cubic-inch engine producing 104 horsepower, the CCKW had 35% more power and far better torque, giving it the muscle to carry heavy loads up muddy hills and bomb-cratered roads. Two main versions rolled off the lines. The shorter 352 used to haul artillery and the longer 353 used for general cargo. Its design emphasized simplicity over sophistication. Riveted ladder frame construction, leaf spring suspension, hydraulic brakes, and components that could be repaired with basic tools. Early trucks had enclosed steel cabs, but by 1943, open canvas tops replaced them, saving critical steel and weight. What emerged was a vehicle that was rugged, adaptable, and easy to mass produce. GMC's factories in Michigan and Missouri operated around the clock, turning out one CCKW every 7 minutes. At its peak, more than 500,000 trucks were built, more than the entire German wartime truck output combined. The CCKW appeared in every role imaginable as cargo carriers, fuel tankers, troop transports, ambulances, workshops, radio trucks, and even anti-aircraft platforms. By June 1944, thousands had crossed the Atlantic, ready for the Normandy invasion. D-Day was a success. But by August, the Allied advance risked grinding to a halt. Not because of the Germans, but because of supply. Patton's armored divisions were devouring fuel faster than logistics could deliver it. Each Sherman tank consumed 150 gall of gasoline per 100 miles, and as American forces advanced Chipre to 80 meters a day, supply depots near the beaches couldn't keep up. French railways lay in ruins. Bridges were bombed out, and the ports at Cherbourg and Arras were overloaded or destroyed. The Allied armies were winning on the battlefield, but strangling on the supply line. Then came the boldest logistical idea of the war. On August 21, 1944, U.S. logistics officers conceived the Red Ball Express, a non-stop trucking operation that would use thousands of vehicles to move supplies directly from the Normandy ports to the front lines. The concept borrowed from railroad terminology. Red Ball marked express cargo that had absolute right of way. In France, red circles were painted on trucks and signs to mark dedicated roads where convoys could run uninterrupted. Every intersection was controlled by military police. Civilian traffic was banned. The plan was audacious, risky, and absolutely necessary. But there was a problem: drivers. The U.S. Army was still segregated in 1944. African-American soldiers were typically assigned to service roles, long dismissed by white officers as unfit for combat. Yet it was these men from the Quartermaster Corps and transportation units who stepped forward to drive the Red Ball Express. Of the 23,000 personnel involved, nearly 75% were African-American. Many were young, barely out of their teens. Some from farms in the Deep South, others from industrial cities or colleges back home. They had only days of training before being sent onto bomb-damaged French roads in vehicles loaded with 5 tons of fuel, ammunition, and food. On August 25, 1944, as Allied troops liberated Paris, the first convoys of the Red Ball Express rolled out from Cherbourg. The operations organization was simple, but relentless. 2 one-way routes, nearly 400 miles long, snaked across France. One for loaded trucks heading east, the other for empty ones returning west. Each convoy had jeep escorts at front and rear, spaced 60 yards apart, running day and night. In theory, trucks were limited to 25 meters. But in practice, many drivers disabled their speed governors and thundered along at 50 or more, desperate to stay awake and keep pace. Roads were unlit. Blackout conditions meant only faint cat's eye lights guided them. At night, drivers followed the dim outline of the truck ahead, praying it didn't swerve into a crater or off a bridge. They lived on coffee, cigarettes, and adrenaline. Some resorted to Army-issued Benzedrine tablets to stay awake for 50-hour shifts. Fatigue was constant. Accidents were inevitable. Trucks skidded off roads, overturned, or collided in the dark. Yet for every vehicle lost, dozens kept rolling. Maintenance was chaos but ingenious. The CCKW's simplicity allowed field repairs under impossible conditions. Mechanics worked by lantern light using scavenged parts, wire, and ingenuity to keep engines running. Trucks were cannibalized to keep others alive. Tires blew out constantly. Brakes wore thin in days. But the Jimmy endured. Soldiers joked that the truck ran on courage as much as gasoline. By August's end, hundreds of broken vehicles lined French roadsides. Yet the convoys still delivered record tonnage, over 12,000 tons a day, by the end of the first week. In just 82 days of operation, the Red Ball Express moved more than 412,000 tons of supplies across France. It was an achievement no army in history had matched. African-American drivers endured racism even as they carried the war on their backs. They were barred from white mess halls, harassed by white MPs, and warned not to fraternize with white troops. Yet, when supplies arrived at the front, even the most prejudiced combat soldiers knew who kept them alive. Drivers like Private James Ruckert recalled ambushes, exhaustion, and the constant fear of Luftwaffe attacks. Corporal Washington, Rector remembered the discrimination, but also the mutual respect that grew when survival was on the line. The Red Ball Express became more than a supply chain. It was a crucible of endurance and dignity. In its roaring convoys, African-American soldiers proved their courage and capability beyond any question. By September, the Red Ball routes extended deep into central France. But the longer the line grew, the harder it became to sustain. Fuel demands were astronomical. Trucks broke down faster than they could be repaired. Drivers fell asleep at the wheel. Some cargo disappeared into black markets in liberated cities. Yet the mission continued. Patton's tanks never stopped. The Third Army's relentless advance across France was fueled not by glamour or glory, but by those endless lines of GMC trucks and the men who drove them. General Eisenhower himself wrote to the drivers, praising their excellent job and recognizing that logistics, not just tactics, had won the summer campaign. The contrast with German logistics was stark. The vaunted Wehrmacht still relied on horses, over 2 million of them, tow-haul supplies. Allied mechanization embodied by the CCKW was not just superior, it was decisive. By mid-November 1944, the Red Ball Express had done its job. Antwerp's port was open, pipelines were laid across France, and repaired railways resumed service. After 82 grueling days, the convoys finally stood down. But their legacy rolled on when Hitler launched his last desperate offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, in December. The same trucks and drivers were called back into service. Under new names, the Little Red Ball and the White Ball Express. In freezing snow and under enemy fire, they kept the front supplied once again. Their engines froze, their hands blistered. Still they rolled. Without them, the counterattack that saved Bastogne might never have come. When the war ended, the GMC CCKW became a symbol of American industrial might and soldierly endurance. More than 500,000 had been built. They hauled refugees, rebuilt Europe, and served in Korea and beyond. Simple, rugged, and endlessly repairable, the Jimmy had proven that victory in modern war depended not on brilliance or speed, but on the ability to keep men and machines moving. Patton himself said it best. The 212-ton truck is our most valuable weapon.